Hello and welcome to my next video. Well, if you've seen my video on a perfectly competitive factor market, where it's perfectly competitive to the output market, in other words, into the market that they are selling the product, the good or services to and perfectly competitive in the input market. In other words, there's a whole lot of workers in the pool of qualified workers to work for the company. We've gone through that analysis, and in that I said, stay with me, it's a little hard to follow. Well, I guess the bad news, I'll just break it to you. The bad news is this is going to be even a little harder to follow because it gets a little more complicated. But we're going to get through this, so just hang in with me there. So now we're going to look at an imperfectly competitive output market. In other words, the product that we're selling, it's not into a perfectly competitive market. But we're going to stay at first with a perfectly competitive input or factor market. In other words, we still have a large pool of labor that we can draw from, but we face a negatively sloped demand curve for our product because of the fact that we are operating in an imperfectly competitive output market. So recall that when that's the case, that the margin revenue will be less than the price because when we are facing our own particular demand curve, we can't sell all we want at the going market price. In order to sell more, we have to lower the price because we have at least a slightly differentiated product. So in that case, we know that marginal revenue will be less than the price. Well, that also implies then on our input calculations about marginal revenue product that it's going to be less than price. So this would be an example using the graphs from the video on where it's perfectly competitive input and output markets. The supply of labor is still the same because at first we're assuming a perfectly competitive input market. We can again hire all the workers we want at the going wage rate, but we can't sell all the product that we're producing and then trying to sell at a given price. In order to sell more, we have to lower the price. And so therefore, notice that profit maximization would be at the point where supply is equal not to the demand if it was a PC, but the demand, which would be the marginal revenue product if it was a non-PC. So notice the price would be roughly $80 and the quantity would be 13. So in a imperfectly competitive input market, the price will be lower. And what I mean by the price, I'm talking about the price for labor. In other words, we're looking at the input market, but because the output market is not perfectly competitive, the demand curve is to the left of the demand curve if it were perfectly competitive. So the wage rate will be lower and fewer workers will be hired. That's compare point A to point B. So again, this is when the firm is selling into an imperfectly competitive product or output market. So let's assume though now that we have a competitive output market, okay, but an imperfectly competitive input market. In other words, the fact of the labor, we don't have we can't hire all the workers we want at the going wage rate. And the extreme of this would be called a monopsony instead of a monopoly. Monopoly is where there's just one firm selling the product. Here, there's just a one type of labor, specific skills that they have, and maybe there's just a few of them. You can think about certain technical skills or technology skills that there's very few people in the world may have. So it's kind of like also an oligopsony is like an oligopoly, except it's over on the factor side. Competitive input and output markets. The extreme case here is called a bilateral monopoly. It's a monopoly and a monopsonist. So we call that a bilateral monopoly. And so the firm hires the factors, and it's the only one that's selling the output product. So there's very limited pool of workers, and they're the only ones producing it. So this also brings up the possibility that the supply of labor, uh, and not just the type of market, I'm just talking about the supply of labor in general. So the supply of labor may be backward bending. This really wouldn't, I guess, actually wouldn't apply to a PC factor market because you've got a huge pool of workers. But where you have some more highly skilled requirements for workers, then those workers, at some point when they're receiving a really high wage rate, they might actually work less rather than more because it's an opportunity concept here. In this case, workers are already getting a good salary, and they want to be able to spend it. So the value of leisure time in terms of opportunity cost goes way up. And so at that higher wage rate, the worker earns a higher per hour wage, but also has 1 hour less of leisure. So there's an income and substitution effect on the supply of labor. And at some point, the income effect may be swamped by the substitution effect. How much do I want to substitute leisure for work? And so they may decide to actually work fewer hours rather than less. Okay, I know this is a little jumbled, um, but I hope you hung in there with me.